The small town of Quincy, Illinois is rocked by the arrest of one of its favorite sons, Curtis Lovelace. One-time football hero, Army National Guardsman, and Assistant State's Attorney. No one was more upstanding than Kurt, until he was charged with the first-degree murder of his first wife, Cory Lovelace.
It was brutally, emotionally devastating.
In fact, when Cory was found dead years before, it wasn't even ruled a crime.
My husband and I were absolutely shocked. It never occurred to us that Cory died from anything but alcoholism, the side effects of alcoholism.
A conclusion supported by the original investigators. So then what changed?
This has been 8 years and he's got charged with murder. He's on a $5 million bond. I was like, my God, this would have to be, ironclad, something solid, What did they have?
Enter Detective Adam Gibson.
Adam Gibson opened the case from the fact that as a new lead detective, they looked through old case files, saw this, thought there were some weird things or inconsistencies, so things didn't seem right to him.
In particular, Detective Gibson thought the position of Cory's arms seemed suspicious, like they'd been holding something, like a pillow. And then there was that mark on Cory's lip, the kind sometimes seen in suffocation cases. But after speaking to both the coroner who saw Cory at the scene and pathologist Dr. Jessica Bowman, who performed her autopsy, Gibson hits a brick wall.
He was told there were problems with your theory. There was no evidence of blood on the pillow. If this was a suffocation, you would expect bleeding and blood. There was none. Instead of closing the file, he goes on and he gets referred to another forensic pathologist, Dr. Shakutis in Chicago.
Gibson sends Chicago pathologist Dr. Shakutis a 4-page summary of the case. Her conclusion, quote, "It was clearly not a homicide."
Not only that, she goes further and says there was no evidence of suffocation at all, and gave all these reasons why this could be a natural death. And he didn't like the answers he was getting.
Dr. Tees also sends Gibson an email stating, "I find no evidence to suggest that Cory Lovelace was suffocated or asphyxiated."
You got 3 pathologists, medical doctors, telling him that there are problems with the theory that this was a homicide by suffocation.
But Detective Gibson reaches out to a 4th, Dr. Jane Turner of St. Louis, and a 5th, famed pathologist Dr. Michael Bodden. And what they had to say was enough for a grand jury to indict Curtis Lovelace for the crime of murder.
A very close friend of mine one day at lunch asked me, is there going to be a big aha moment, like a Matlock kind of a moment? And I said, I don't know what it would be. You'll have to stay tuned like the rest of us.
The court battle begins, and one of the first questions that needs to be answered is why Curtis would want his wife dead in the first place.
Cory never had an insurance policy. Kurt didn't have an insurance policy. They were living just above poverty, so there was no motive for Kurt to kill Cory.
The prosecution wanted the people to understand this was not a happy household, and that Curtis basically said enough is enough, and then led to wanting to kill his wife.
But that's hardly enough to indict someone for murder. So just what did the prosecution's expert pathologists have?
The photos in the prosecution's case showed signs that she could not have died that morning. Her arms were in rigor mortis, hovering over her body in unnatural positions.
And based on that positioning, both Drs. Turner and Bodden concluded that not only had Cory been suffocated with something like a pillow, but her body had been in rigor mortis for at least 10 hours. Of course, there was one big hole in that theory. Make that 4 big holes.
All 4 kids reported that their mom was alive that morning, on Valentine's morning. That mom came downstairs, got a pair of jeans out of the laundry, that she made sure that they took their Valentine cards to school. Their memories were very clear that their mother was alive that morning.
And as for the rigor mortis, pathologist George Nichols, witness for the defense, testified that rigor mortis varies between people and can set in as little as 30 minutes.
The defense was also kind of pointing out the fact that in the original overview with Detective Jeff Baird and Coroner Gary Hamilton, that the rigor mortis was very mild at the time of the scene.
Finally, Nichols concludes, if this woman was suffocated by a pillow, I've missed dozens of homicides in my career.
The only existing disease process in her body was that of an abnormal liver.
So if there was no crime, why was Kurt on trial? On the stand, Detective Gibson testified that the grand jury which indicted Kurt only ever heard from one witness, Detective Gibson.
And he even admitted under oath he didn't bring up Dr. Shakutiz's email to the grand jury. He only brought up the report from Dr. Turner.
There were multiple doctors contacted before one of them would say that they thought that this could be a homicide. I think it was evident right away to most of the people in the gallery there was no case here.
But maybe not so evident to the jury. After 2 days of deliberation, they can't seem to make up their minds. Was Cory killed by her husband or by her own liver failure?
Later than that evening, I got the text message to return to the courthouse.
And the news is not good for Curtis. The jury is split 6-6. The judge declares a mistrial.
I started crying. I was shaking. I was so distraught. And my husband told me, babe, I'm not coming home.
Cameras follow the family out of the courtroom.
You guys have any reactions, guys?
Curtis returns to his jail cell. It's a major setback, but he and his family are not giving up.
We have the truth on our side, and that's the most important thing. When you have the truth, you will win.
Next, after spending most of the next year behind bars, Curtis Lovelace gets his last shot at proving his innocence. A new trial, and this time, he's taking the stand. But he has a new problem. Wife number 2, testifying against him.
Are you claiming you know that Kurt killed his wife now?
I know.
Okay, how do you know?
I've watched him get rid of evidence.